So our guest today, Anthony, is a Walkley award-winning journalist specializing in sports, the outdoors, weather and climate. He has spent the last 10 years as a writer and editor on leading Australian news websites and has also presented television shows, radio programs and a podcast. He's a skier, a hiker, a lifelong lover of Australia's high country. He's there right now. And his brain was pretty much fried after a decade of digital journalism. And so he went on a solo trek through Australian Alps walking track. And he took it as a chance to escape, to cleanse and reset. Is that about right, Anthony?
That's about right. You can just read the blurb, and I'm probably redundant here, really. But yeah. I hope everyone can hear me okay. I'm down in the mountains again today, researching another project, which I'll talk to you all about towards the end of the talk. But it's a bit windy, it's a bit chilly. There are some nice rapids in the Thredbo River there, which might be contributing a bit of background noise, but hopefully you can hear me. And as Christine said, this is the landscape of my dreams. The mountains of Australia, our precious high country, have always been my favourite part of Australia. So when I did want to reset, to cleanse my brain from the responsibilities of more or less the 24/7 news cycle, which had been consuming me in addition to my day-to-day duties as a husband and a parent and a member of my community, there was only one place I was ever going to go, and that was the high country. And there was this 660 kilometre trail through it, the Australian Alps walking track, which I only heard about.
I've got a picture of the track. It's actually in your book. There it is. So it's not a small journey at all by any means.
No, it's not. And as I write in the early chapters, there are these through hiking, as it's called, has become increasingly popular. And I'm sure many of the people there today have read books like Wild by Cheryl Strayed, who did America's Pacific Crest Trail, and it's a lot longer than the Australian Alps walking track. It's something like 3,000 kilometres. It's 3 or 4 times longer, but it and other well-known trails in America, like the Appalachian Trail, or well-known trails in Europe, like Spain's El Camino de Santiago. These trails all have refuges along the way. They have resupply points along the way. They go through existing towns and villages. The Australian Alps walking track is 100% backcountry all the way. There are no resupply points. There are no towns. It crosses only a few roads. You must rely on yourself for everything. It does come very close to Thredbo, and I did cheat and come into Thredbo, so that helped. So I made Thredbo one of my resupply points. But generally, you have to drive down through the bush, as anyone who's read the book will know, and leave all your gear, so not your gear, you carry your gear, all your supplies, your food supplies, in predator-proof plastic barrels hidden in the bush along the way. So it's almost akin to taking on an expedition rather than a long hike like some of the Northern Hemisphere's best known through hikes. And because it went through the Australian Alps, and because I wanted to reset, as I said, because this is very much the landscape of my dreams, I knew that this particular suburban dad with not a whole lot of backcountry experience had to give it a crack.
How long did you take from going, right, I'm going to do it, to actually doing it?
Well, it was a dream for a few years, but I decided in June 2019. And then I started accumulating gear. Every monthly pay, I'd go and buy a backpack or some boots or something significant. And I walked every weekend. Once I bought pack and boots first, because you've got to walk your boots in and you've got to feel your pack where it hurts, where it feels comfortable, adjust it right. And I would load it up to about 20 kilos, which is roughly my weight at the start of a food drop, roughly a kilo of food a day. So, and roughly 7 days between food drops. So my traveling weight with full water and food would be somewhere between 20 kilos and about 13 kilos. But I'd load it up to 20 kilos and walk the Royal National Park just south of Sydney. And, there's a good trail I found there that was a mixture of trail walking and sort of backcountry style rocky terrain. And I would never say I got fit, but I got trail fit. And I ironed out all the kinks in my boots and the straps and so on. And I learnt to navigate by map and compass properly, which I just did on YouTube, but I went out there and made sure it actually made sense to me. I bought 13 or 14 maps, had them mailed to me and studied them and made marks on them, because although you can navigate by GPS and you can navigate, there's even a map app that has the trail on it. The Australian Alps Walking Track, I should have mentioned this earlier, is not only does it have no facilities on the way or resupply points, it's often not a track. It's often not a path on the ground. It is accepted.
You've got many instances in your book where you're like, where am I?
Yeah, and that's okay, and you've got to prepare for that. So there's a lot of psychological and logistical preparation, and I did all of that, and yet about 10 days in, I kind of had a total mental breakdown because the first week was the hardest week of my life.
Right. Just because of the sheer enormity of the task, or was it just you hadn't got certain things laid out, or what was the reason for the breakdown? About
10 days in. So the first week, I suffered through a blizzard and mild hypothermia in the first 3 days. Summer blizzards do come to the Australian Alps. 3 days later, there was a heat wave and I was pissing blood for 2 days. I had an accident in a river crossing and lost some gear. I got lost. And then I came to a long, high plateau where there was almost no water for a week, and a long, high ridge, and the only way to get water would every day at the end of the day to walk a long way down, fill my bottles, and then walk up. It was just excruciating, the thought. And so I actually backtracked a couple of days, hitched out of the mountains and hitched back up. And I must make it really clear to people that this is a book about a journey. When you're a middle-aged bloke from the suburbs like I am, you don't go and hitch around strange back mountain roads with strangers. This was as much about a bloke who was leading a suburban life and a life in an office building, throwing myself to the four winds a little bit and feeling again what I haven't felt since my late teens and early 20s, what that felt like. And it was also about the people in the mountains, because the guy who took me out of the mountains was an incredible guy who was actually up there resupplying other hikers. And I learned so much about the mountains through him. And because of the day or two I missed, I met all these other interesting characters along the way that I would never have met. And it just felt like it was meant to be. So this book, From Snow to Ash, and my journey, there's nothing binary about it. If you go to Everest and you don't make the summit, well, you don't have a book and you don't have that little belt notch on your CV. I'm very, very cynical, sorry, about people who climb Everest. So apologies to anyone in the building who has. But I'm sure a lot of people do it with good intentions. But it seems to me that a lot of these quest-driven sort of things are about, I did it, I'm terrific. This was a quest to see it, to feel it, to experience it. The fact that I missed some minor bits here and there really took nothing. In fact, I ended up adding to the experience. So yes, I had a breakdown 10 days in, but the fact that I was open with myself about it and open with the reader about it, and that it led to better things, just shows that getting out and getting back into the mountains was part of the journey, not a detraction from it. It didn't mean I did 3/4 of the journey. I actually think it means I did 1 1/4 times the journey, because I had the landscape plus the people.
Yeah. And how long did you plan to be away? And like I find this quite being a mother and a partner. How did you convince your family? Well,
we had a couple of milestone birthdays in the family. without giving ages away of me or my wife, which wouldn't be polite. And I invited my wife to go on a overseas trip with one of her friends, and she grasped that opportunity, Christine. So I had what you might call marital brownie points in the bank.
Okay.
Possibly I used a few more than I had, but we also had one child. My eldest, I've got two, but my daughter was on student exchange in France last summer when I did the hike just before COVID and everything, which is terrific. She could get 4 months in Bordeaux and do that as a 16-year-old, and so my wife only had one to look after. So the fact that she owed me a couple of weeks plus half the childcare load, plus she had time off over summer, so she wasn't working, that more or less gave me the 6 weeks that I needed, Christine.
Okay, so it was a 6-week journey. That was your goal, was to do. And if you hadn't actually got to where you wanted to be in that 6 weeks, were you willing to cut it short, so to speak, even though you had to cut it short for other reasons?
Yeah, I did have to cut it short because of the fires. And I really want to make it clear to everyone that I'm not some absolute idiot who disobeyed all the signs of fire and stumbled off blithely and too boldly into the Australian bush in what became known as the Black Summer. The fires were in the Alps in October and November. They were the earliest fires I'd ever had. A nice juicy summer blizzard that I had will make me cold on the trail, but it also did a terrific job of putting out those fires. And the Alps thereafter had no fire at all until they did. But while the East Coast burnt, while Sydney filled up with smoke, while people on social media were, oh my God, I can't see across the road because of the brown smoke, the Alps were blissfully fire-free and clear. I had views from the highest summit of Victoria, Mount Bogong, and Bogong is the Indigenous word for mountain, so that's Mountain.
It's Bogong, right? It's not Mount Bogong.
It's Bogong, yeah. So I had views that went 150 kilometres minimum from Mount Bogong. It was incredible. So the mountains were actually a really, really good place to be until, as you say, eventually my trip, sadly was cut a little bit short, about 100 and something Ks from the end of the 660K trail by a fire that moved into Kosciuszko National Park quicker than anyone had ever seen a fire move. And,
right.
I interviewed the chief fires officer. I interviewed 2 fire dynamics experts for this book. I really want to make it clear to anyone who hasn't read From Snow to Ash. My hike serves as the narrative spine to this book. It's ostensibly a hiking book about a bloke hiking through the mountains. There is self-actualization and mental recharging, which you find in all of these hiking books. But I really wanted to make this something bigger. I've already explained to people that I love the mountains, and I wanted to share that mountain love that I have with people. So the journalist came out in me, and I interviewed 19 or 20 or 21, something like that, people for this book. As I said, fire people, alpine ecologists, Alpine Hut's historians.
When you set out, did you always know you wanted to do a book or to do some kind of an article, even if it wasn't a book?
Yeah, that's well said. As a journalist, I was always going to write something, and I didn't know what it was, but I don't think it's giving too much away, Christine, to say to people that, look, I was plucked out in a helicopter very, very suddenly, and I won't give that whole scene away because it's a pretty interesting scene, but I was the last person taken out of Kosciuszko National Park on a day when the entire park, which is New South Wales' largest park and one of Australia's largest national parks, was evacuated. I was the last person they got. And they got me, by the way, because I had logged my trip properly. So all you hikers out there, log your trip with parks. It really works.
And you mentioned that you did your research. One of the books that comes up a lot, and I'm going to share this, is this book by John Chapman. It's almost like it was almost like a love story to John Chapman and Monica in some regards, because they were one of the first to, is this the only other book that kind of deals with that particular walking track?
There is one other. There is one other, but that's the main one, or the most popular one.
You kept referring to it as the Bible.
I did. It is the Bible, and you'll be extremely pleased to know that sales in that book have spiked dramatically. I got a lovely.
It's actually out of stock. I looked on their website.
Oh, well, there you go. Well, last time I spoke to John Chapman was about 3 weeks ago, and he said, "Anthony, what are you doing? I'm running out of books." So I'm glad to hear he's finally run out. That's terrific, because he's a independent publisher. He's Australia's kind of guru, in my opinion, of hiking book publishers. He's a hiker's hiker. There's nothing he hasn't hiked, and he's of course one of the people I interviewed. And you know, there's something that people always forget to ask people when they interview them. They always ask them about the things they do, but they forget to ask them why they do the things they do. I said to him, "John, what do you feel? What is it about hiking?" And his answer was fascinating. His answer was, "I love that out there, you're in charge of your own decisions." And that's a bit of a persistent theme in the book, is that one of the joys of hiking and backcountry is, you know, we live in a compromised world. We go to meetings in workplaces and we have to grit our teeth, and that's okay. That's part of being a grown-up, is going along with things that you don't always agree with. But at the end of the day, it's terrific to get out there and make your decisions. Shall I camp in this spot or the next one? This creek or the next creek to fill my bottles? Is it going to rain? Is it not? Am I lost? Am I not? Big and little. What shall I have for dinner? The chicken curry or the bloody spinach curry? The palak paneer. You know, all of these big and little decisions are yours, and it's actually one of the most freeing things about hiking is that. But to wind this back to how we started talking about John Chapman, I mean, he was one of my interviewees, and you know, we were talking about, did I plan to write a book? I knew I'd write something. I pitched it to a publisher. To my surprise, Hachette, wonderful people, said yes straight away. I sat down, and that's when I said to myself, I was evacuated on New Year's Eve. The pitching was in January this year, 2020. The contract signing was the first week of February. The manuscript was submitted, 70,000 words, in April. So I had 2.5 months to interview 20 people and drill into their souls, put it all on the paper, write a book about my trip, but a book that is not about me. And I will say this to my dying day. It's a book by me about my trip, but it's not about me. It's about the mountains. And so you go through the mountains, seeing what I see, you experience what I experience, you go through what I go through, but you understand it through the experts, through the ecologists, through the historians, through the cattlemen, through the locals, through the Brumby haters and the Brumby lovers. And I think I'll stop short of calling this an important national book, but when I think about all the literature of the Snowy Mountains, it's in two categories. It's mythological, like The Man from Snowy River, the Silver Brumby series of books, or it's almost textbookish or guidebookish. There's not a lot that's in the middle ground where I've written that has some of those textbookish elements, but explained in a
it's narrative,
fun narrative, readable way. So
you do throw in a few dad jokes.
Well, you know, I mean, I'm a dad and I make dad jokes, but I make no apologies for that, because part of what I'm doing there, Christine, is something almost literary. I'm replicating the hiker's mind. There's a bit of realism going on there.
Yeah, I know. There's some really humorous parts. So let's go and talk about the mountain itself. So you started in snow. I think we've one photo. Do you want me to show photos or?
Yeah. Show the Borrrow photo of the snow at the start. This was day 2, if you can get the photo up. Through the snow gums with the snow there. How will I know when you're showing it? Are you showing it? Oh, here we go.
Can you see it?
Yeah, I can. And, you know, one of the people I interviewed was the president of the Friends of Borrrow. So that area is Borrrow, B-A-W. And it's interesting because it's the only part of the Australian Alps that hasn't burnt in 80 years. So of the entire Australian Alps. So it's got these magnificent old snow gum forests like that don't have any charring or burning. And he calls that area Hobbitland. And you can see why. It's got this almost Tolkien-like sort of Middle-earthy quality with just these, the path snaking through the snow gums like that. I just adore that photo. And It was bloody freezing though, but it was nice.
And then hang on, let me just see what else we've got here. And then you come across some beautiful, absolute pristine ponds up there. You showed us the water at Threadbow, and it's clear and
Okay, this is really important. This leads us into a chat about the Brumbies that we can have later. But this is oh, it's gone.
Oh,
that was
sorry. I'm trying to get back to it.
So what it is it was a pond up near actually on Mount Bogong, the highest peak I already mentioned in Victoria, and it's a pond which is lined by the famous if you know the mountains, moss of the mountains called sphagnum, and it's a remarkable plant that grows alongside and near all the waterways, be they creeks or ponds or swamps, and it's that yellowy fluoro sort of plant, and you can see there's a line of the creek just behind it, sort of running across the screen. But there's a little pond beside the creek, and the sphagnum holds the water and filters it so that even if it hasn't rained for months, the creeks and ponds, the creeks still flow in the Alps. There is nowhere in Australia outside the wet tropics, a small area in the north. There's nowhere in the southern 2/3 of Australia where creeks will be guaranteed to flow all year, small creeks. But they will in the mountains because of the sphagnum, which holds, which is a moss that just holds the water and lets it out drip by drip very slowly. Now, unfortunately, the deer, the pigs, and the horses, aka the Brumbies, like to eat the plants around the sphagnum. They don't eat the sphagnum itself, but there's lots of plants that they like around it. And they like to roll and wallow in that area. And Christine, if you can move to the next image, which is the pond next door, like literally only 10 meters away. Whoops, there's some snow patches on Carruthers Peak. There it is.
It's kind of flicked back, yeah.
So that's what vast sections of the mountains are starting to look like because of the feral animal problem. And
did you know this before you embarked on your trek? Did you know this was happening, or had you had a sense of it, or was it just, oh wow, this is worse than you thought? Or
I had a very vague sense, Christine, but it's I didn't have a well-formed understanding of it. And indeed, I'm here in Threadbow for my follow-up project, interviewing a famous ecologist about it today. But it's a disaster. It's I've framed it as catastrophic as if the Great Barrier Reef itself were being destroyed, which of course there were starfish attacking it years ago. Maybe they still are. Coral bleaching is a shocking problem now. Runoff from agriculture is a problem. So the reef is under threat. But people tend to think of mountains as these big, hulking, strong things which are impervious to damage. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. And that sort of pond, which is, as I say, being replicated across the Alps, the waterways are the lifeblood of the Alps. Australia's greatest rivers, the Murrumbidgee, the Murray, and the Snowy, all rise up here in the Alps. They are all fed by the water in the Alps. They all run all year because of this water. If these ponds go and the creeks go, because the sphagnum moss is all destroyed, the rivers go, they don't flow all year. Australia's waterways are irrevocably changed. That's a hard word when you're sitting on a river off to say, and the government's multi-billion-dollar investment in Snowy Hydro 2.0 is threatened as well because it relies on clean mountain water. So we literally have this problem with feral animals that it's threatening ecological and economic chaos. It's a massive problem, and I've touched upon it in one or two chapters in this book, and I'm going to be touching upon it on a much greater scale in the follow-up project, which I signed a contract on quite recently, and which will be published next year. So that's that. Drink of water.
And here's this beautiful the snow. So this was in November, wasn't it, or was it October still?
No, that's January. No, that's no, it's not. That was December 28 or 29. That's above
Wow.
Club Lake on Carruthers Peak. Tragically, the eternal snowfields of the Alps are something we've lost. I interviewed, I've already mentioned twice, an ecologist today. I don't know if I told you he was 95 years old.
Wow.
When he used to do field work up there, they couldn't start till April because that's what it looked like in April. Warming and the associated lesser winter snowpack have already drastically changed our high country. That's another one of the problems. You tend to think of, maybe it's warming and maybe the poor old skiers will have a shorter season and we'll solve that with snowmaking, and they're all reasonable assumptions. But the whole ecology of the Alps in many different ways relies on snow as well. But if you do go up there in December, January, you'll see snow patches like that. And again, for those who haven't been up there in summer, it's probably the best time of the year. So that's really just a bit of snow patch porn to make people love the mountains.
And also to say, the snow patches, they're going, right? They're diminishing.
Yeah.
Diminishing. So you embarked among, like, there's these beautiful little huts up there. So who keeps these huts alive? Is it different groups of people, right? That
there are two or three main groups. So the mountain huts are vestiges of mostly the cattle era, when cattle used to run in the mountains. And of course, they did terrible damage like the feral animals are doing now. And that was recognised, and we got rid of the cattle at the grazing, although there are still pushes in Victoria in places to bring them back, and potentially in New South Wales. It's one of those issues that will never go away. But most of the huts used by cattlemen, and some of them were built by miners and other loners in the Alps of one sort or another, most of them were considered junk in the late 20th century, or in the 1970s and 80s, and they were going to be removed. And I've profiled the man Klaus Huniker, who wrote the absolutely seminal book Huts of the High Country, which showed that. And look, allow me to quote myself. I wouldn't often do this, but seminar about my book, I'll quote myself. There's a line in my book where summarising, the change in attitudes towards the huts that occurred after Klaus's book was published. I said the huts were like the piece of old junk in Grandpa's shed that turned out to be a valuable antique worth thousands, except in this case, it wasn't some chair in the corner, it was the shed itself, because the huts were considered junk, but suddenly they were considered treasures, and they are treasures. Archaeologically, archaeologically, that's a mix between archaeologically and architecturally. I just made a word up. Archaeologically, they were considered.
Get it.
I like that word. And they're all different, and they're all terrific. And the Kosciuszko Huts Association preserves them in New South Wales. The Victorian Huts Association in Victoria. There are a few groups. They're all volunteers. I'm going hiking for 2 days tomorrow with the chief history officer of the Kosciuszko Huts Association, and these people do it all in their spare time. They do it a lot with their own money. Parks contribute some, but when parks can't because of budgets, they'll contribute their own, and they will walk off to places like this, which is Valentine Hut, which is smack bang in the middle of Kosciuszko National Park, in the Jagungal Wilderness area. And Valentine Hut is an absolutely gorgeous little red gingerbread house, as you can see there. It may even be made out of...
It's just worth making the trek up just to have a little peek inside. You describe it wonderfully. All of those little red hearts. There's many features inside, right? That are
and they've got bunks, and I mean they don't have feather mattresses. You've got to bring your own gear, but and I should
be a hike, right?
Yeah, and I should say they're emergency shelters, so you always have to bring a tent. You can't rely on a hut, but people go there and camp next to them. And if there's no one around, then the etiquette is you can stay in the hut. But If someone else got there first, then they can stay in it. But as soon as an emergency comes along, which happens a lot in winter, or a blizzard, anyone's allowed in there, and the emergency people take precedence. But so you don't rely on them. I'd hate to put the wrong message out there, but you certainly plan your trips, hiking hut to hut, and that's Valentine there, and it's on the Valentine River. I think I wrote in my book there was no tryst between love-struck cattlemen, Brokeback Mountain
moment.
Yeah, there was nothing like that. It's just named after the Valentine River, whose name I don't know the origin of. Sorry, but and it's got little red and white motifs all the way through. Even the dustpan and brush has red and white little love hearts all over it. So it's got 3 rooms in there, and they have potbelly stoves, and they're absolutely fantastic places. And there are hundreds of them.
That's your backpack in the front, right?
It is, and that's also my stick and pole combo.
Did you get the stick back? I think it was, or was that left in when you were picked up in the fire?
I left my stick and pole in a hut called Mackie's Hut, where I was evacuated from, and Cross Country Skiers retrieved it in September and returned it to me recently.
Oh,
Good
no
on
way!
Them. Love their
Good
work.
on them.
I meant to show them to everyone. They're just in the car. I'm sorry, but yeah.
Oh, really? So the stick is now part of your trekking repertoire, like it's.
Oh, absolutely! It's my second hiking pole, and
right.
for all the aspiring hikers out there, use poles. They save your knees a lot, especially when you're carrying a heavy pack, and they just stabilize you on a steep slope. And if a Brumby stallion charges you, which does happen, wave a bloody big stick, and that'll stop it. So carry sticks.
Did you see many Brumbies on your journey?
Oh, did I see many, trees and rivers? Yes, of course I did.
No, but Brumbies, did you see Brumbies?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of
they're just everywhere.
That does the Pope shit in the woods, as they say. Yeah, yeah. They're not everywhere. They're confined to certain areas of the high country. But I've been walking. Look, as the book makes clear, I'd never done more than a sort of 2 or 3 night overnight walk, so I wasn't much of an adventurer. But I'm a high country hiker with enough experience, and I've been to enough areas, and that I can, accurately report that Brumby numbers have massively skyrocketed in recent years, and there's no secret why. The main reason in New South Wales, where most of the increases happened, is because they're now protected by law. John Barilaro, our Deputy Premier, in 2018, brought through the Wild Horse Heritage Act. It's now a bill of law, and it's the first law in the history of Australia that protects a introduced or feral species in a national park. So while I have all the love in the world for horses, the animal, and while I have respect in the world for Brumby advocates who see them as part of the mountains, and they have been here for 180 years, and when you're talking 6 or 7 generations, that's a touchstone that you can't deny. There's no also denying that the Brumbies do a lot of damage and that their numbers have increased dramatically, because since that bill was introduced in 2018 and it was in the works since about 2015-16, there's been no removal of horses, and you have to remove them, otherwise they breed like crazy. Even in a drought, there's enough up here in most of the high country, there's enough grass that they can flourish and increase in numbers. So I don't mind telling people that my next book that I am working on is about the Brumby Wars. It's about the cultural flashpoint over these mountain horses, which is more than a story of the mountains. It's an Australian story. It's an Australian tale. It's a culture wars issue through the prism of horses. It's every much an Australian culture wars story as, for example, settled versus invaded in 1788. Horses belong here, horses don't belong here. It divides on exactly or almost exactly the same lines, not always. And it's a book about Australians and what we want, and whether we think the European landscape that we've made is the landscape worth protecting, or whether we think the landscape that predates us is the landscape worth protecting. There are towns at war. There are kids at school in Jindabyne at fisticuffs in the playground. There are people who shop at Coles and people who shop at Woolies, so they know they can avoid each other in Cooma. The mountains are actually at war with each other over this symbolic issue. It's a fascinating Australian issue, and that's what I'm working on now. So, without giving too much away, although that's giving everything away, but
yeah.
if you want to beat me to it and write the book, well, good luck, because I'm well advanced. So I don't mind giving that away.
And so the book title's called From Snow to Ash. So it's no, we've seen pictures of snow, but there were some ashy pictures. Let me just cut to one of those. I know you were picked up rather suddenly by helicopter, but you do kind of drop little seeds in the book along the way about the smoke coming along. Did you think that it came along gradually? And so let me just show you this picture, everybody.
If you're going to show Cascade Hut, yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
So that's one of the famous cattlemen's huts, Cascade Hut. And if anyone who was a fan of Eli Mitchell's The Silver Brumby series, the famous books, they were set around the Cascades area, and there were hundreds of Brumbies around that. Not hundreds, but dozens. This is about a week before the end of my hike. The smoke started to drift in, so there were still not fires in the mountains, but they were getting closer. And
it's a little bit of what we experienced here in Sydney was that constant haze.
Yes, but the day before wasn't hazy. 2 days before that wasn't hazy. And Christine and everyone, when you're hiking alone, when there's no other hikers there, when you don't have any phone reception for 4 days, and when smoke drifts into a thickly wooded valley that you're sheltering in that night, it's frightening. And that was frightening. And what I did was go down to the creek, find the highest earthen bank I could find, leave some of my stuff there so it wouldn't be heavy, sleep in the hut with all my stuff, with all my woolen clothes on, because synthetic fabrics burn, and my boots on. And I slept ready to sprint straight down to the earthen bank. It was an awful night, and I had a few nights like that towards the end. You knew something was coming, you just didn't know where and when. And again, I pressed on because I did go through Thredbo then, and I had all the internet I needed, and the nearest fire was still almost 100 k's out of the Alps. Fires don't move at the speed of the wind. If you've got a hot, blustery day with 60, 70 k/hour winds, the fire doesn't move at 60 or 70 k's an hour. But the fires that hit Kosciuszko that came from so far away. They came from up near the Hume Highway, which is a long way from the mountains. And they came in about a day and a half. That reflects how big and bad the fires were, how dry the countryside was, how hot it was. A combination of factors that the fire officer, Ian Dicker, who's run Kosciuszko fires for 18 years, had never seen before. So based on historical records, I had reason to press on, but historical records don't count for much anymore. The mountains have changed, the world is changing, the climate is warming, the old rules don't apply. I found out that the hard way, but thankfully not the crispy burnt way, the really hard way, because I was fortunately plucked out of the park.
And so this picture here, does that come up on screen? From the helicopter as you're being lifted up?
Yes, it is. I took it out the window. I had 3% phone, and again,
I was kind of like, that's one question I wanted to ask you. I'm like, is that from when you were picked up? Because that's amazing that you actually thought to pull the camera out. Because I'm sure you were probably thinking a lot of other things at the same time.
I was, and there's a bloke out there on the trail who for a month called himself a hiker, or at least I was trying to be one. I didn't do a terrible job of it. But there's another bloke inside me who's a journalist, and he took over quickly at that point.
Right.
The journo inside me, as soon as that helicopter landed, went, all right, okay, this is not a bad story. Your trek started in a blizzard and ended in a blaze. I couldn't charge my phone that day because there was too much smoke and cloud in the sky. There was both, which is why I only had 3%. I had a solar charger for anyone who's interested who hasn't read it. And most days I was able to get nearly 100%. And then my phone did run out on the in the helicopter, and I think I made a joke about that too when I was being evacuated, but I won't spoil that one. Maybe it'd be better to spoil because it's not a joke. But no, I thought it was a reasonable line. But so I had the presence of mind there because the journo in me took over. The journo in me went, you got to record it as much as this as you can. I think that might have even been a still from a video. I'm not sure. I can't recall now. Sorry.
Did the fire come through there? It did.
Mackie's hut was attacked by fire 3 times. Huts around it: 4 Mile Hut, Happy's Hut, where I was going to have a Happy's New Year. They went. They're extremely treasured, gorgeous old huts. They're gone forever now. Mackie's is an absolute beauty. Great fireplace in there. Nice little library of mountain literature, like old sort of diaries and stuff. It survived. The fire came 3 times and they fought it 3 times, 3 different ways. Once from the air, once on the ground with a fire truck, and once again on the ground, the old-fashioned way with branches, with snow gum branches. And they got it. They saved the hut, which was an incredible effort by the parks, because as I say, these huts have heritage value, but they also have emergency shelter value to hikers and to especially cross-country skiers.
Yeah. So wow. So that literally is where you ended your journey there.
Yeah, it was. And then I guess there's this scene afterwards in Jindabyne where I'm walking around a bit dazed and confused, which I think is a good scene. And then there's a final chapter, which you wouldn't normally leave the best till last, but I think it packs a real punch, the final chapter. It's where I sit down and have my interview with a Hut's historian who I mentioned 4 Mile Hut just down the road from that one, which burnt. He'd spent 2 years writing a book on 4 Mile Hut, only to see it burnt down.
Yeah, no, that even reading that, I was like, oh my God, poor man.
There was laughter, there was tears. It's an interesting final chapter. So, I've given away the fact that I was rescued, but I'm not gonna spit out.
Well, you're obviously rescued because
I'm here.
With us today. You didn't die.
Have I said enough? Have we got any questions?
We haven't got any. Oh, hang on. Just as you say that, there is going to be 2 questions. I think Pauline is just writing them in. She's just popped. Very interesting. Two questions, please. But we're waiting on the questions.
I'll show some more river for those who want to know.
You met a lot of colourful people on your journey. Did you expect? Like, I'm sure you expected to meet some people, but was it more or less than what you hoped for? More.
A solo trek is about you and the mountains, or so you think. But I met some really, really interesting people. I mean, chapter 10 with old Rivermate on the Mitta River.
Rivermate. And, you describe it as sometimes escape is a prison, and I'm like, yeah, that's very accurate.
He's this vagabond, for those who haven't read it, down on the river, and he had a hard life, and his life wasn't getting any easier just because he didn't have a job to go to every day. It was a really interesting, I thought, character profile. I don't mean it was a wonderful character profile by me. I just mean he presented himself as a fascinating character to profile, so I did, and that was the sort of thing I hadn't anticipated. I had an anticipated conservative Christian couple coming down to the river, explaining how the progressive left in the inner city was not the sort of childhood they wanted to give their children, and that might be an abhorrent statement for some of the people to hear, and it wasn't necessarily aligned by any means with my values. But when you have a conversation with someone on the Mitta River, things go better. And I think there's a real lesson there. I think we stay in our bubbles, we stay in our zones, and we can't understand, for example, Trump's America or the other side. When you go to their places, when you're in their worlds, you don't have to agree with their views, but you can see that they're people, and that they're coming from a genuine place, not a hateful place or a spiteful place. And I met a lot of people out there in their worlds, and I hope that I've faithfully replicated their worlds or brought to you that little snapshots of their worlds, because the mountains are a place of human geography as much as they are physical beauty.
So old mate, he had his super dupers. I thought that was fantastic.
Well, super dupers. I mean, it was 44 degrees for 3 days.
When you're hot and thirsty, there's nothing better.
Well, I think, do you want a super duper? He said. And I've written, are you kidding? I'll have 100. I mean, it's a 44-degree day down on the Mitamita River. And, bloke's giving you frozen icy treats. It doesn't get any better.
It doesn't get better than that. So we have a question from the audience. So Pauline Wall has her 2 questions. Did you sign in each day where you were using your mobile? When you were logging your trip, when you did the right thing and logged in? Did you do that every day via your mobile? I think that's what she means. Yeah,
the answer is no, because I couldn't get reception some days. I think I might have mentioned one day there was a 4-day stretch. There was at least 3 stretches of at least 3 days. There were quite a few 2 and 3 and 4 day stretches where I couldn't get anything, or just got it fleetingly. I logged it, the New South Wales section with the national parks here, and the Victorian section down there. So I logged it with 2 different authorities. Excuse me, and I probably should have logged the ACT section with the ACT authorities, which is the last 3 days of the trail, but I never got to the last 3 days, so it didn't matter. But that's what I did. I did it all in once. And of course, the issue then becomes, well, what if you're not on schedule? What if there is a blizzard, which there was? What if there is a heat wave, which you sit out, and there was? What if you do get exhausted and leave the mountains, which I did? Funnily enough, it all evened out, and I ended up back on schedule. Because I skipped a bit and I sat out a bit, and that evened out. So had that not happened, I would have definitely contacted parks and reset my schedule, but I didn't have to do that. Yeah.
And the second part of Pauline's question is, presumably you spent Christmas on the trail. So I can say in the book, there's a whole section about that. It's actually quite lovely what eventuated.
Yeah, Pauline, Christmas, the day before Christmas, I was meeting my wife in Thredbo on Boxing Day. Right here, right by the river. I swam with my son. I'm not even kidding you. Right there, little pool just above the rapids. So this is one of my little happy spots in life. I hope that showed up. But
it did.
Yeah, good. I was meeting my wife on Boxing Day, but I was ahead of schedule. I was walking fast. I was in a good rhythm at that stage, and I was within range of Thredbo on Christmas Day, and I just went, "Oh, you're kidding! I need to go to the pub and have a Christmas lunch." Like, I craved pizza. Actually, I didn't crave the traditional ham or turkey or whatever you have. But the pizzeria wasn't open, but the bistro was open in the pub. It was just basic pub fodder. I don't even remember. I just had a hamburger and chips. It was the greatest hamburger and chips in my life, of course. And a beer. And ironically, I lost my taste for beer on the trip. It didn't taste good at all. I've got it back. I'm not much of a drinker anyway, but I have 2 beers like anyone else. And on the trip, I only craved Coke. Even when I was off the trail, I didn't want beer. But that was Christmas Day, and my wife showed up on Boxing Day with Christmas leftovers. We came down here to the river and ate them. So whilst I wasn't with family, I was able to call them on Christmas Day, and sitting in the pub by myself. It's supposed to be a family day. It was actually one of my favourite Christmases. Maybe I'm a terrible person for saying that.
It's all part of your reset, right? You just need to experience a few things by yourself for a while. I get it. We have another question. David would like to know more practical thing. What size solar panel did you take on your trip?
Oh, bugger! I'll have to look it up, David. But let me say this to you.
Is it in the book? You've got an equipment list. Is it listed?
Yes, I do. There's an equipment list up the back, and I mentioned I know I don't mention the size, but I'm sure the dimensions. I mentioned the name of the product. It was something like 5
plus. Is that right?
Yeah, but anyway, everyone kept saying, "Why are you carrying an iPad on the top of your thing?" So it looked about the size of one of the big old iPads, not one of the sort of hybrid half-size ones. So that's about how big it was. And it did the trick. Smoky skies didn't help in the last week, but it did store the energy. That's crucial. So I found it adequate. Don't know if I'll use it for this trip coming in a few days. I'm just going for a 3-day hike. If I was going for a long one again, I might be tempted to take a charging brick instead and duck into a ski resort every 2 weeks. But I'm not sure. But yeah, as I say, it's on the.
I have to say, if anyone who's listening to us today or watching the recording later, there is a very extensive equipment list. Have I got it on screen? There's pages of it, and you very, very thoughtfully list out exactly what you did. I didn't read through it in depth. I'm not planning a hike anytime soon, but is there anything that you wished you had that you hadn't brought?
I wish I'd brought one more warm jumper, which sounds crazy because I had a big thick fleece and thermal layers and shirts and stuff, but the mountains in summer.
And a spare. I know there was one thing, a spare cord, wasn't it, for your
charging cord? Spare charging cord, but I won't spoil. There's charging cord drama. I won't spoil every chapter.
No.
No, not really. And there's some things I never used. I never used my mosquito net.
Really?
I just
I'm
never
surprised
found.
by that.
I just never found it that. Oh, you get flies all over you and you get mozzies at night, but I would imagine the tropics would be worse. It was never that much of a bother to me, but other people won't go out without them. But no, I more or less got it right. And again, that reflects, as I said to you, the 6 months of every weekend walking, testing gear, plus some overnight test trips.
So you couldn't just pack your bag and go on this. You have to be prepared. You have to be.
You need to know what works for you to do anything longer, I would say, than 3 or 4 nights in the backcountry, because you can last that long in misery, but you can't last longer than that and have another week to walk and another week after. You'll just be going, oh, this is too horrible. So
I mean, I guess you had that breaking point 10 days in, and you had done all of that preparation. So don't anyone try this without due diligence. Hey.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think if you've got any more questions, we've got literally a couple more minutes. So is there anything that you would like to leave? What do you want people to take away from this talk today, or from your book in general, I should say?
I want them to take away a copy of the book, but
you can borrow from the library,
or borrow from the library, because
or get it from Constant Reader. We've just popped a link up, and we'll send that out again. We've had it all. We like to support our independence, Anthony. So we've popped in Constant Reader.
Please do. You can get it anywhere, but to me, I'm thrilled that people can get it from Randwick Library and other libraries, because I want readers. I want people to understand the issues in the Alps. I want people to understand the mountains as I now understand them, and to love them as I've always loved them. I want people to see this as a great part of Australia, as valuable, as iconic as Uluru or the Reef, as I said earlier. I do think the big three in Australia are Uluru, Central Australia, tropical Queensland, and the High Country. I think they're the big three iconic landscapes, and not enough is written about this one. So I want people to know it and understand it. And I want people to know that, as I said earlier, sure, this is a hiking book, but it is a book about the mountains, and but it's not a bloody lecture. It's really not a lecture.
No, it's not. I can vouch for that. It is quite a nice story as well, because there's a bit of drama in there. There's a little bit of tension, and it's got all of the things that you like from a fiction book, but it's factual.
It is quite fictiony in style, and I hope the Brumby Wars book that I'm doing will mirror that, and will be about Australians and characters and storytelling about humans with passions, rather than just a bland portrayal of he said, she said journalism style. I want to go into some wild, beautiful, crazy storytelling, and I think there's some in this book too. So I just hope everyone enjoys it. And if anyone ever wants to contact me, best place is always Twitter. I'm out there. I respond to everybody at Ant Sharwood. I know most people are on Facebook or LinkedIn, but I tend to ignore those. I'm out there on Twitter, so find me there.
Okay, thank you. So did you ever imagine, when you came out off the mountain by helicopter in such a dramatic scene, that you'd be walking right into COVID a couple of months later?
No, no, that's
Why?
interesting.
What are you?
Interestingly, you know, December 31 was a big day. It was the day I was evacuated. It was the last day of the 2010s, and it was the day that a strange virus was first identified in Wuhan, China. So there was a lot going on that day.
A lot going on. Lot going on.
Coronavirus, excuse me, society reset a bit this year, and it felt like a good time to be writing a reset book, actually. So there's some vague sort of tie in there, I think.
I think there is. Absolutely. Well, I think you probably had the time to write it. It may not have got published as quickly had you not had the,
absolutely,
life not shut down as much as it had.
That's absolutely the case. No question at all. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll leave you to your beautiful location. I really wish I was there. You've brought a little bit of the outdoors into Zoom, which is so lovely. So lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you.